Now, when you think about your integration build, the arrange, act, assert of your build, the one piece where you need to consider Octopus Deploy is in the packaging step that's at the end of your integration build. And Octopus Deploy makes it super easy. You can package these up as NuGet packages. You can package them up as zip files. We're going to show you the pack. In this demo, we have zip files, basically a zip file for the web application, a zip file for the SQL Server database. And that's where Octopus influences that. But at the same time, even if you were using any other method of deploying, you would still need to package up whatever it is that needs to be deployed. All right, so let's switch over and let's talk about the intersection between the build and packaging and getting ready for our first deploy and what that looks like. So we'll switch it over to, go back. We'll switch it over to Chris's screen and just jump through that, and we'll show some of the artifacts. The first of which is if we're going to deploy a SQL Server database or changes to it, then in our source, and of course building, we need to have the place where SQL files are. So this happens to use DBUp, but popular ones are Roundhouse and AliSQL. The new Entity Framework and .NET 6 also has a mechanism to run arbitrary SQL scripts, as well as some interesting things that the ORM does. But in general, the mechanism of deploying a database is to deploy in sequence a series of changes, and then with a little history table in the target database, you just store the names of the files that have already been deployed so that you don't accidentally deploy them again. That's basically the architecture of a database deployment. So Chris, I'll kick it over to you, kind of walk through here.
Sure. So thanks for that breakdown of all the stuff we need beforehand, and is very great. Going to the actual things we have here, this is normal database, very simple, very light. Or this database is mocking up and tracking applicants, and if you're tracking people applying for new positions at your company. Coming here, we have skills and applicants and some joint tables happening here, but they're all done in the scripts table. This particular instance, we're using DBUp. We take the scripts and we put them in the same assembly that the DBUp is, so that way everything, the scripts and the executable and everything is assembled in the version together. So you just have to worry about one package and not have to worry about trying to sync up different scripts folders or different versions of your runnables and that sort of thing. This is why I chose to use DBUp in this case. We also have the webinar web app that's also sort of going along up to be our placeholder for our webinar, for our web app being deployed. This is hooked up with Git and showing when you make changes and check them in, it goes up to our build server here in Azure DevOps. So you can see there's lots of builds we've had in process here, along with different branches going on, and each one kicking off the same pipeline, but can change what things happen, which gets important when we're talking about Octopus Deploy, because when you start releasing things, if you're doing pre-release builds, things that you don't want to go into production, you can use Octopus to set up channels. And we'll go over that in more detail later when we get to the deployment side of things. But having the control to switch between doing what branches and stuff you want to deploy is something powerful we can use. So if we go into our pipeline, go to look at our YAML file. As soon as I can, there it is. Here we have our trigger bases based off of two different branches we have here, and a lot of setup stuff for like some of the variables, the pool is going into, and then I have our job section, and I have 3 jobs defined: a build, which builds our solution. Then we have release jobs, release full, and a release dev. And the only real difference between the two is we have a condition on the build succeeding, and we're checking if our source branch is on the master. If it's the master branch, then we're going to deploy, and this is all set up to our full channel deployments. Whereas our release dev, the channel defined here is going to be our dev only channel, where it only deploys to our dev and test environments, preventing it from ever going to production and inadvertently deploying some sort of more risk or unfinished features and bugs that haven't been completely tested and vetted into production. And so that's the purpose of having our channels here. And once we build and get to this portion, it sort of gets kicked off to our release section of our webinar. Did you have anything you want to go over before we go into the display there?
I will say that if some of you are looking at this build definition here in Azure Pipelines and your eyes are crossing, you still do have the option to use the designer-based configuration for your build. The difference architecturally is that the YAML is stored in your Git repository, and so it becomes compatible with branching. So if you have a change in your build script as a result of something you're doing on a feature branch, well, you have compatibility. Whereas the designer-based configuration that been around a lot longer than the YAML configuration, that is global in nature, and so then you have to manage it if you have a change on the branch, so it doesn't break all the other branches. That's architecturally the difference. Other than that, it's just a preference, whether you like a designer or whether you like to kind of do it in code yourself.
Great. So yeah, the Octopus Deploy has recently added that same functionality to their user interface called config as code, where all of the design that happens in the UI can be stored in the Git repository as well.
That's actually a key difference. We're not showing it now in Octopus, is kind of outside this scope, but Azure DevOps chose to make a break in compatibility between the designer and the YAML. Octopus Deploy has chosen to keep those in sync, so that even though the configuration of your Octopus project is stored in your Git repository, the built-in designer in Octopus can edit it. You don't have to constantly be going back to a text editor in order to edit it. So I really like the fact that Octopus did that, because it just makes it a lot more discoverable. And for simple edits, more people are going to be able to do it just because of tooling. I mean, we love our IDEs, we love development tooling, and not having to remember every bit of syntax for every line.
Right, and that also comes handy if you need to do like large edits. If you're changing like a name of an environment or name of something, you can go to the source file in your Git repo and do massive find replace if you needed to do massive edits like that, not have to go through the UI and click all the boxes.